More and more, I hear from people who are avoiding going new places because they're scared. It goes beyond the goal of avoiding danger because, for example, I may need to drive through a poorly patrolled, lawless neighborhood. Maybe it's between the freeway and the medical center the HMO sends me to. So I think that what we're going to talk about today is a bigger topic than not going to the 24-hour supermarket at 2 a.m. or not drinking in a bad part of town. And so I think we need some common sense coaching, and who better than you, who's traveled extensively, lots of experience operating in strange environments, sometimes stranger than others. Who better than you to talk to us about going to and staying safe in unfamiliar environments? I have your book, Choose Adventure, and unfortunately I left home too fast this morning, didn't bring it. I was going to show you. It's all marked up, it's highlighted, there's pages tabbed, beautiful. And there's so many things in there that I find applicable to travel inside the U.S., as well as reminding me of some of my adventures overseas. I really enjoyed the book, and I do recommend it to people. But can you start us out with a little bio, a little bit about your career, your many travels, and, hey, what you're doing now as a busy retired guy?
Sure. I'm a retired police officer. I worked 25 years as a police officer in a suburb of Columbus, Ohio. 13 of those years I spent as the full-time tactical training officer for the police department. I had a very wealthy police department and a chief that was very pro-training, and he sent me off to any kind of training anywhere I wanted to go, as long as I brought the skills back to the officer. So I amassed about 90 different instructor certifications in that time, all different realms, mostly use of force related. At about 30, I decided I wanted to see the world and got a passion for travel. And since then, I've been spending 6 to 8 weeks a year in countries where I can't drink the water, doing crazy things. And I decided to combine those two passions, my desire to teach people how to stay safe with the firearms and defensive tactics kind of stuff, with my passion for travel, and wrote a travel book designed to teach people how to stay safe in kind of questionable areas, whether those are international or here at home. I retired about 3 years ago, and now I spend about 40 weekends a year traveling across the country, teaching gun and knife and empty hand and medical classes all around the country.
Well, that's great. What's the riskiest place you've been to?
Oh man, there's too much. I've been to every country in Latin America and most of Africa, quite a bit of Southeast Asia. I would say some of my ventures in Africa were pretty risky, as well as some Central American, Brazilian places were a little sketchy too. There's just too many to list.
For today's topic, I'm wondering if we could start by exploring our own perceptions and our possible interactions with others. And one of the books that influenced me many years ago, so a hat tip to the book, Left of Bang. How quickly can you establish a baseline if you've never been to an area, but here you are in it now? How does that work?
It's tough, Left of Bang is a great book, and, the premise of the book is establishing a baseline, learning what is normal behavior so that you can quickly detect what is abnormal and act on that. If you're not local to the area, it may be really tough to quickly establish the baseline. What I like to do when I travel into unfamiliar areas is pay a lot of attention to the locals and what the locals are doing. More particularly, I tend to pay attention to local females, mothers, especially parents with kids, because those kind of people aren't going to put themselves in dangerous situations unless they have to. So if I'm in an area and I see a lot of single females out exercising or walking alone, if I see mothers with children, if I see parents with kids walking around, that tells me in general it's probably a pretty safe area, and I tend to model the behaviors of those folks until I can get a better read on what's normal, what's abnormal, and go there. So I like paying attention to the single women who are alone and the parents with kids, because they provide probably being the riskiest population, most vulnerable to attack. They provide a real good resource for deciding if something is safe or not.
I like that a lot because one of my questions was going to be whether that varies between domestic U.S. and overseas. And of course, kind of the concurrent question, if I can put this in good words, is are people just always people? But I think mamas are pretty much universal.
Pretty much universal around the world, absolutely. I think that's probably one of the more universal things. And I would say in general, people are people. There's some variety on how people act, but in general, people have the same motivations, and everybody's trying to be safe. So it's not all that different between here and other countries once you get the baseline down.
That's great. And I think that we as a group of people tend to always want to say, how much can I front load my knowledge base? What ways can I get a sense of the environment, even get a sense of the layout before arrival, and how detailed can I lay that knowledge in? Well, domestically, maybe that's easier with apps like Waze or whatever your favorites are, but I'm wondering about your thoughts on that. Let's say you're going to have to go to Baltimore and you've not been to that part of Baltimore before. What do you do?
Some things that I look for, domestically, if I haven't been to an area before, I'll tend to pull it up on Google Maps and take a look at it, both the satellite view and the street view, kind of get a feel for things. And pretty much universal. I'm looking for signs of disorder. That's an indication of danger. Do I see a lot of graffiti? Do I see a lot of broken windows? Do I see people aimlessly hanging around? Purposely, especially young working age males during the day? Are they just hanging out without a reason to be there? I'm looking for that kind of stuff. I'm looking for bars on the windows. I'm looking for lots of security guards. That kind of tells me a little bit about the place, and I can often get that from just very basic satellite views, Waze, Google, all of those kind of things. Something that I tend to look for if I'm unfamiliar with the city and don't have a whole lot of time to research it, I tend to look for a hotel or a place to stay near real upscale shopping venues. So I look for expensive department stores, something like a Whole Foods grocery store. They don't put those stores in bad neighborhoods. So that kind of gives you just a real quick indication of, is this a safer area or not? It may not be 100% safe, but you're probably not going to be staying in the ghetto if you've got a Whole Foods grocery store next to you. The other thing I look for is police departments. Even if I'm in a bad part of town, staying within eyesight of a police department, probably a good move. Even if the police are corrupt in other parts of the other parts of the world. They're probably, the criminals aren't going to usually commit a whole lot of crimes within view of a police station that is active. So I look for those kind of things. I look for upscale shopping malls. I look for police stations. I look for expensive grocery stores, and that generally gives a kind of a baseline level of safety, with some exceptions.
Next question has kind of got a macro side, and then it's got a real granular side, and that is talking about escape routes, because that's something that we're told, and I think many of us have had our checklists. We've had our endless books that we've read on personal safety, and one of the things is always know an escape route, and I guess that I'm wondering how well you can do in an unfamiliar place where there may be unexpected road blockages, maybe a gas main broke, or blocked exit doors. How do you hit the ground running? And are there even just generalities that you apply to your safety to get past those kinds of problems?
Sure. I really like getting the lay of the land around the area where I'm staying, so I can kind of develop some of these mental escape routes. And I start as soon as I land in a foreign country, or maybe even a strange city, by talking to the taxi drivers. The taxi drivers know the areas that are good, the areas that are bad, and where to avoid. So I try to, as I'm getting a ride from the airport to my hotel or my Airbnb, wherever I'm staying, I've talked to the taxi drivers and asked the taxi drivers, drivers what areas are good, what areas should I stay out of, and they usually have good intel on that kind of stuff. And then I follow up the same thing when I'm checking into the hotel. I ask the hotel clerk, I'd like to take a walk around the hotel. Are there any areas I should stay away from? And usually they know. They'll say, hey, you don't want to go more than 3 blocks west. It gets a little kind of shady there. But if you move to the east, everything's fine. And then I'll go take a walk. I'll set my luggage down and I will go take a walk. I will find an alternate exit from my hotel floor. I usually like to explore the fire escape, see where that turns up. You might be surprised. It's a lot of places, especially in Asia, they lock up the fire escape doors and you really can't get out. It's good to know that before you have to flee some area. So I'll take alternate routes out of the hotel and I'll take a little walk around the neighborhood and see take a look at what's going on in the neighborhood, get an idea of the general safety, and then kind of plot my my exit strategy should I have to leave in a hurry.
That's good. So once you're on the ground, you really are, your job isn't done. You really are laying in some more knowledge there. And I think that does work in the U.S. I mean, I don't think I'm not a gloom and doom person. We talk to some people saying, "Well, we're very much third worlding." Maybe we are eventually. I don't know, but I think sometimes people who say that haven't really been in the third world real deep because it's real different. But I do think that there are certainly areas where things are not as good, areas where crime does go uninterdicted, areas where they've just fired the police force and there's nobody there doing that patrol around that police station that we thought was an active police station, and guess what? There's nobody there. So I'm wondering. Again, this almost goes back to studying the mamas, and our people. Does recognizing that you're being set up for a robbery have similar warning signs in the U.S. as in third world countries?
Some yes and some no. In most other countries, we see fewer firearms. So I would say the robberies that I investigated as a cop in the U.S., most were firearm related, armed robberies. And we see more knife crime in other countries, more multiple attackers doing strong arm robberies, physical force, and more kind of setups like scams leading to robberies, less direct than here in the U.S. But it all depends. In some areas, you might have the single armed robber, just like you might have here. Other places, it might be a crowd of unarmed people, youth gang members, things like that. But in general, a lot of the setups are the same. But the weapons are different, and the other factor is you're probably not going to have a police officer involved in your robbery in the USA. In another country, you can't really depend on the police, depending on where you're at. Canada, Western Europe, Australia have generally pretty good police departments that aren't corrupt, but other parts of the world, the cops may be involved in the robberies, and you got to keep that in mind, where you really probably don't have to think about that too much here in the United States.
So we could go back to those setup cues, and maybe we aren't just talking about robbery, and I don't know if we want to do each one, but carjacking, abduction. I mean, I think abduction sometimes in other countries is a much bigger deal than here, although, we certainly have our share of trafficking and rape and robbery and all of those things. So, or even multiple aggressor attacks. Since we've got some gang issues and have for some years now, let's not say that's anything new. So what are the warning signs that we're seeing halfway down the street, Lord willing, and we say, I think I'm going to be, on one of those exit routes?
Yeah, I think, and probably this is universal here or any place else, anytime someone is paying undue attention to you, you might, as a foreigner, attract a little bit of attention, but when you have young males paying lots of attention to you, I think that's a bad sign. They're watching you for a reason, and it may not be good. Time to get out of there a little bit. More more so in the foreign countries than here in the US, I think any kind of local approaching a traveler for help should be considered a warning sign. I'll give you an example. If you were here in the United States and you encountered in the shopping mall a couple of Japanese, obvious Japanese tourists, not speaking English, speaking Japanese, would they be the first person that you would go to for help should you need it? I would say probably not. Those are, I want to be able to communicate with someone I need help with. I want someone who knows what's going on locally. I'm not going to target a traveler or a tourist to help me unless there's no one else available. And when you get those requests for assistance or help from the locals, you really have to be careful, because that's a warning sign. Most locals all around the world, they aren't going to pick the obvious tourist to help them in an emergency. They're going to be looking for locals like themselves that have a better idea of what's going on. So I think those two things, lots of attention, a request for assistance in another country, and then like we talked about earlier, that change in the baseline. It could be a quiet bar or it could be a loud bar, and either one of those are fine. But when a loud bar turns into a quiet bar, that change in the baseline, that's what we need to recognize and act on. So when you see those kind of three things, I think those are big warning cues that you're not in a place you should be, and it's time to move on as quickly as possible.
Well, and I don't know how true this is for the U.S. You'd be a better person to give this input. But I do know when we're out of our familiar environments, we are at risk of offending the local culture. Maybe we're too abrupt. Maybe we're not polite enough. Maybe we seem ingratiating. Any number of things that is just how we operate in Seattle, Washington. But it's not okay to operate that way in Nogales, perhaps. Do you see us making mistakes domestically that way, or is that really more a foreign traveler's problem?
More foreign, for the most part. Yeah, there might be some minor differences, but I think mostly foreign. And I think a lot of the guidebooks and areas, they put a little bit too much emphasis on this, to be honest. We understand as Americans, if someone from another country came to our country and they did something weird, we wouldn't necessarily judge that as offensive, because they're coming from a different place and they may not understand what we do here. I think most people all around the world are the same way with Americans traveling there. Even if you do something offensive, they tend to cut you a little bit of slack because you don't know the rules. Try to keep smiling, apologize if you've offended someone, ask the question, did I do something offensive? They'll tell you. I think probably the biggest thing that we see is just differing in hand gestures. So as a general rule, I try to minimize talking with my hands and making hand gestures when I'm in other countries. But otherwise, if I screw up, most people are going to cut me a little bit of slack, just like we would cut a foreign traveler a bit of slack here. It's not quite the death sentence that some of the guidebooks might make it out to be if you make an unintentionally offensive hand gesture.
Personal safety, certainly we want to understand what's going on away from us, but so much of it is what's going on in here, what we're doing. Even the simple thing, and you've just mentioned this without really harping on it, smiling, looking pleasant, looking friendly and kind. But there are lots of what's to do, what not to do checklists, and moving beyond safe behavior into what we project. I think one of the things that many of us are a little bit baffled about is managing or even masking fear if you realize you're in a potentially bad situation. What are your thoughts?
Again, that smile is really, really important. Being decisive tends to, I think, be one of the critical factors that can mask that. Even if you are scared, making a decision and following through with that decision, if I'm scared something is not right here, rather than stay in the environment and continue to get some information, make a decision, act, get out of there, find something else. That's probably a pretty good piece of advice for dealing with the fear. But the other thing is having better knowledge of what to actually be scared of. You know, when you're traveling to other countries, the chance of you being kidnapped or shot in a terrorist attack are really, really small. And the chances of you dying in a car crash are much greater than here in the United States. Your heart attack risk is the same in another country as it would be here. You know, the things that kill travelers aren't the kidnapping attempts and terrorist attacks and robberies in general. It's car crashes, kind of more mundane things, and those are the areas that you need to be really more scared of than interactions with the local that you don't really understand. Having a good baseline knowledge of the types of attacks that are common in the areas that you're frequenting and what really tends to cause lots of damage will leave you a little bit less scared when you have to interact with the locals. I tell a story in my book. I was in Ecuador, and I was a relatively inexperienced traveler. I'd only been traveling internationally a few years, and I I decided to take a walk through Quito and ended up in a local neighborhood that there weren't many tourists there. And I was a little bit scared, and I had a guy that was on a trekking tour with me, and he was staying at the same hostel, and he was with me, an Australian guy, and we were walking along, and there were a whole bunch of drunk locals that were actually out in the street drinking big 40-ounce bottles of beer, and we quickly attracted their attention. And here are these drunk guys approaching us with these big bottles, and I'm thinking, oh, the fight's on for sure. And we get surrounded by these young men that are drinking out in the street, and in their halting English, they asked us where we were from, and we told them, and they kind of smiled and said, "We don't get many English speakers here. If you let us practice our English, we'll share our beer with you." And what we thought was, we're about to get smashed in the head with these big beer bottles by these drunk locals, turned into an impromptu language lesson and shared beers in a street in, some rural town in Ecuador. So, being scared of something isn't always indicative of true danger, and you got to understand that. And the more experiences like that you have, the less scared you get.
Yeah, that's a good lesson about coping with fear, because I think that we're told, well, don't project it. The predator will pick up on it. And indeed, maybe if it is, oh, gee, look, I could take that lady's purse, or gee, look, that lady's got a nice bracelet on, I want it. Maybe that is indeed the truth. But then to go back to what you said is, I'm going to quote the great John Farnham here, don't dither. There's a lot of truth about that decisiveness. And now we go back to, well, am I going to make a decision that takes me deeper into danger, which of course is our fear, or am I just going to take some decisive action and move forward from there? And I think that that's very applicable domestically, which is really what we're more likely to encounter here. What things do we do, and probably more domestically, what things do we do that catch the eyes of predators? Back to that, gee, I could take that bracelet off that lady.
Sure. An obvious ostentatious display of wealth. That's true whether you're here or abroad. You don't want to be the person with, the very expensive watch with all of the expensive jewelry, counting the cash in your wallet on the street in front of people who, have far less than you. So any kind of obvious displays of wealth are a big no-no, both here and abroad. And then combined with that, a general cluelessness. If you don't look like you know what's going on, you aren't aware of what's going on around you, you aren't paying attention to anything, those are go signals for robbers, and that's universal. That's around the world, here or abroad. So those two tips are probably the easiest thing. Pay attention to what's going on around you, act like you know what's happening, and don't flaunt your wealth anywhere. That'll keep you out of a lot of trouble.
And kind of going back to that not projecting fear thing, one of the things I think that people get conflicting advice on is, well, scanning. How surreptitious is your scanning? Are you head up or you head down? Are you locking gazes with people? What do you let your gaze pass over so you don't miss the real approach? How do you address keeping your head on a swivel, or do you?
Well, I don't. I try to, when I'm entering a new environment, look around and see what people are doing. Just very generally, I don't make active scanning motions. I'm not constantly head on a swivel everywhere, because I find, especially outside of the United States, that gives the locals the impression of one of two things. One, that you're very, very scared. And again, that's a go sign for the bad guys. The other is, especially for a guy like me with short hair, who's big, who looks like a cop, it looks like I'm paying attention to everybody, and no one does that as a foreigner unless they are CIA, DEA, some type of foreign police officer who's working with the locals that may be trying to shut down whatever kind of crime syndicate the locals have going on. That's a bad place to be. I don't want to look like a DEA agent all by myself in a foreign country who's looking to shut down their drug selling operation, and that's what happens when people have that constant scanning, head on a swivel kind of situation. I like a just kind of a relaxed awareness of what's going on. Know who's around you and what they're doing, and if you can do that without looking like a paranoid freak, you're going to be way, way better off, especially in a foreign country.
Well, that's almost a test of how sophisticated we are. Maybe that's the wrong word, but that's the only thing that comes to mind right now. And I'm reminded of the great Ed Lovett, who I've had the privilege of spending a little bit of time with and interviewing. And as I recall, I bounced that phrase off of him asking about awareness, and he indicated he really did not care for that phrase in Ed's inimitable way.
Ed is a wonderful resource, a friend of mine I've known for a very long time, and anybody who's watching the interview here who doesn't know who Ed Lovett is and hasn't read his book with Dave Spalding and his Snubby Revolver book, they should be at the top of your reading list, because he has some experience that very few people have nowadays.
That's absolutely right. The man's a treasure. And getting kind of back to our domestic side of things, which I think that's one of the gifts you and frankly Ed bring to our knowledge base, is that ability to say, yes, I may never end up in Ecuador. For my money at my age, that's okay. But I did that stuff when I was 30. I'm not 30 anymore. But we look at our domestic situation, and I think that we could seriously use coaching on how to ask for help as safely as possible after an accident, after a car breaks down, maybe after an unexpected medical issue. I mean, how do we fail other than just not asking for help? How do we get help when we need help?
Knowing, in foreign countries, knowing the word for help is probably pretty useful. But if you're asking for help after something serious, car accident, medical emergency, you've been robbed, that kind of thing, I think most of the people who are coming to your aid, who are interested in you, can kind of figure out what's going on and get you the help that you need. That's one of the things that people are pretty good all over the world, and maybe even more so in other countries, because in a lot of countries there's a feeling of national pride, and they feel bad if a tourist is hurt, injured, or something like that, and they really want to show a foreign tourist that they are helpful, kind people, and will do everything possible. Now, the issue is what can be done in those environments. You get someone in the United States and you need help, and you call 911. In most places, you're going to have a police or medics there in a short period of time. That may not be true in other locales, but I think most people are going to be as helpful as they can be, and I've never really encountered that or had much of a problem in that area. It would only be if I was completely by myself, and I'm seldom completely alone in any of these scenarios.
And domestically, so again, that's kind of that comparison domestically to other countries. Do you think we as Americans are just a little less quick to step up and say, that guy's in trouble, he could use a hand?
Yeah, I think so. And it might be our legal system that does it. I think there's a big fear of lawsuits that doesn't happen in other countries. You know, the legal systems tend to be a little bit different. And furthermore, I think Americans are accustomed to allowing authority figures to handle problems. And especially in the developing world, there is no one coming to solve the locals' problems usually, and they're more likely to be helpful and figure things out for themselves rather than waiting for the military or the police or the paramedics or anything like that. The locals are used to helping each other because they can't really rely on any of the governmental institutions to help on them. So I think it's probably you're in a little bit better spot if you're in a foreign country asking for help than you are here in America.
I think we as citizens could take a page from that book and maybe be a little kinder to our fellow man. I think one of our big fears, and maybe me as I age out a little bit, is as we get frailer, as perhaps we have more illnesses, what if we collapse on the street? What happens to us? And I think that is every bit as big a fear, be it Baltimore or Brazil.
Yes, no doubt. No doubt. The one thing that I really encourage, excuse me, I really encourage folks traveling internationally to do is to get some travelers' medical insurance. I've seen lots of instances where people, Americans especially, just assumed that their health insurance worked in foreign countries, and it generally doesn't work that way. Oftentimes, they require a big prepayment in cash before any kind of treatment has happened. They won't bill your insurance company. You'll have to pay and then submit things for reimbursement. And having some kind of cheap traveler's insurance policy. The medical insurance policies are not that expensive. A couple weeks would be less than $100 for most people. That's a good thing to have when you travel.
And I think that also kind of on that topic of medical adventures is I think it also goes to something that you mentioned in another context a few minutes ago, and that is the issue of decisiveness. Do we say, I don't feel too good, I guess I'll see if I can get to the ramp to the freeway, or do we say, I think the old ticker's not working so good, or I'm lightheaded? Do I get help at that point? That decisiveness issue that you referenced before that's a pretty big deal.
Something else that I tend to research if I'm going to be staying in another country is what hospital is the best. A lot of the developing world has kind of a two-tiered hospital system. Much of the developing world has a level of free universal health insurance for everyone that involves using a public hospital with fewer resources and more demand. And then they also have a private care system where you can pay a little bit more money for a little bit quicker or better care. And knowing which hospital to go to is kind of important. So guidebooks will often give you some good information on hospitals. The other thing that I tend to check when I'm going into other countries, really good resource, is lots of cities have Facebook groups for expats living there. That people, Americans, Europeans, Canadians living in other countries with experience with how the local system works, and joining those groups and asking a couple questions about medical care. Where would you go if you had to go to the hospital? That might be a really important thing, especially if you're traveling and you're older or you're not as healthy. May not be quite as important for the young 20-year-old in perfect health, but as we age and as we develop medical conditions, knowing where to go should something happen might save you a lot of time and hassle.
I'm not sure, but what we aren't getting that two-tier system domestically is starting down that road ourselves, but that's good. And so I think that what we're really essentially doing, whether it's about medical care, whether it's about asking for help, whether it's about avoiding problems, I think we're trying to strike that balance. And it's interesting to talk to you about it because even just physique-wise, your balance is going to be so different than than my balance. And yet, I don't want to be so safe that I never leave home. I'll find myself leaning that way sometimes, but I don't want to be that person. Same gesture. Thinking back to when I was 20 or 30, I don't want to take stupid risks either. I think my warranty with God may have run out. You know.
Yeah, I was just saying, there is that, you don't want to take unnecessary risks, but I think a lot of us, especially folks who are into the self-protection and the gun world, tend to overestimate the risks of foreign travel and going there, and they tend to underestimate the benefits. I think that I have learned more about dealing with criminals and dealing with people of other ethnic origins and backgrounds, and just how to be a good human through traveling than I ever learned through any of the thousands of hours of defensive training that I had. The benefits of travel, you become a more adaptable person, and those skills remain with you even when you come back home. And I think that's really critical, and that a lot of people fail to account for the benefits of the travel and tend to just see the risks, and that's a bad accounting in my estimation. I don't want you to do stupid things, but there are a lot of ways that you can travel internationally, even to potentially dangerous areas, and do so in as safe a manner as possible. And I think the benefits of such travel way far outweigh the risks of doing that. And that's something that a lot of people in our community don't have a real good handle on, mostly because of lack of experience. The first time I traveled, I was completely paranoid. The very first time I left the country, I was 28 years old. My sister had a destination wedding in Jamaica, and it was the first time I left the country, and I wore body armor on the plane, brought every type of weapon imaginable, got down to Jamaica and got on this resort, and all the resort folks were saying, stay on the resort, it's too dangerous to go outside. And I actually got bored after several days on the resort and decided to take a walk. And I started walking into town, and I went into a convenience store to buy a bottle of water to drink. And a taxi driver came up to me and he approached me, and he introduced himself and told me he just got out of the Jamaican military and was trying to make a living as a taxi driver. And he said, I'll make you an offer. I'll give you a private tour in my taxi of my hometown here, and you pay me what you think I'm worth at the end of it. And I thought to myself, either this is going to be really good or I'm going to end up missing a kidney somewhere. But I took the risk, and he gave me a great tour that only a local can provide. All the local markets and the local restaurants and local bars and some of the scenery that you wouldn't have known about as a tourist. And it was such a good trip that I booked him the next day for the rest of my family to do the same kind of tour. And without taking those kind of risks, I would have never had such a wonderful experience learning about a completely different culture. And that's the kind of thing that a lot of folks don't get. They're too worried about their safety, and it's really not all that dangerous to travel to other countries, even the lesser developed ones. Most people are not trying to, kill tourists or rob you or steal your organs. You're going to be fine in most cases.
Well, and that's an interesting thing, and it's really let's play a little mind game. What if that had happened in Nolens, for example?
Yeah. That wouldn't no chance would I jump in a random car with somebody who approached me on the streets of New Orleans, or but in another country it just the equation is a little bit different. People act differently, and some of the risks pay off, and those benefits are something a lot of people really discount, and they shouldn't, in my opinion.
I think here domestically, sometimes we say, and especially with either permitless carry or reciprocity, then the other side of our contingent is say, well, I've got a gun, I'll be okay. And so again, we're doing that balancing act. I think we're more prone not to leave the front door myself, but then there's the other folks who are saying, well, should you have really been there even if you had a gun?
I think each person has to draw that line individually. I don't think that, having the gun gives you a license to do stupid things, especially in our current litigious environment. I wouldn't do anything with a gun that I wouldn't do without a gun, either here or abroad. If I wouldn't do it because I'm not armed, I probably wouldn't do it. Period. That's probably a smart way of looking at things. That gun doesn't give you a license to do stupid things.
That's an excellent soundbite. You may have the title for your next book. Would I do it without a gun? Question mark. Are you writing anything else?
I am. I currently have 6 different books in some stage of completion. I think I have writing ADD. I get a book about halfway done and get bored with it and move on to the next one. But I'm currently trying to finish 2 of them. I spend most of my winters now in Playa del Carmen, Mexico. I'm writing a travel guide for first-timers to that city. And then I'm also working on a book on developing world tourist scams. The chapter in my current book that's got the most feedback from the readers is the chapter on travel scams. So I wanted to expand that. So I've done quite a bit of research. I've traveled Mexico and Turkey and Colombia, trying to intentionally get myself scammed, interacting with every hustler, drug dealer, hooker I can find on the street, just to see how their scams work. And I'm writing all that up in a book that should be out before the end of the year if everything goes well. So look out for that one. I think it'll be a good one.
The things you do for us, your readers, my goodness.
Last summer I spent 3 weeks in Colombia in a very wealthy part of Medellin, where most of the expats live. But because it has money, that's where all the hustlers and scam artists operate too. And every night after dark, I took an hour or 2 walk on the streets, and I speak passable Spanish, and I engaged with every single con artist and hustler that I could find, just to see how they were trying to scam me and see if I could learn how they operated. And it was very educational. I don't know that I would recommend everybody take up that cause, but it was good for me, and I learned quite a bit doing things like that. So I repeated it both in Mexico and in Turkey this last summer, and got some good results. So it's all going into a travel scam book that I'm working on right now.
I can't wait to see that. Do you ever anticipate yourself writing anything about defensive tactics just for plain old Americans? Because I think you've got a real wealth there.
I've thought about it. The issue is is it a valuable use of my time? Most Americans don't read. My big travel book that I published, 500 pages, is very successful by independent publishing standards, but I could make more in a weekend of classes than I made, after 8 years of working on the book. It comes down to, should I teach more or should I write more? And right now, the writing isn't paying as well as the teaching. So I think what I'm going to do, I've got over 2,000 articles on my website at activeresponsetraining.net. I've been writing 3 to 4 articles a week on there since 2012. I think eventually, when I get done with all these books I'm working on, I think I'm going to start compiling some of the articles that I've written into books on certain topics, and I think that will be my contribution to the American self-defense scene, is just compiling and editing stuff that I've already written into book form that people might be able to reference for a little bit longer.
Yeah, that compendium would be great. And in the meantime, viewers and readers, it's all on active.
ActiveResponseTraining.net. Yeah, 3 articles a week, every week for, almost 12 years now.
What would you like us to take away from our talk today?
I think I start my book with this. Most of the people who are going to be watching this video or listening to this are familiar with John Farnham's admonition not to go stupid places with stupid people and do stupid things. The same holds true for international travel. You don't want to do those stupid things, but the problem is being unfamiliar with the environment. We don't know what's stupid and what isn't, and what may be stupid here may not be stupid in other areas. So a little bit of research before you go is really, really important. And I would say that the benefits of travel in the developing world far outweigh the risks for most people, and that's an equation that is improperly weighted in many folks' minds. And I think if they did a little bit of exploration, the world would be a much better place for them, and it isn't as big of a danger as people make it out to be.
And I think what you just said applies equally to going to visit the other coast. If you live on the West Coast, going to visit the East Coast. Go to the mountains, go down to Galveston, whatever you want to do.
Staying inside, locked in your living room, with your AR-15 sitting next to you isn't really the life that I want to live. There's time and place to be paranoid and to be armed. I'm not discounting that at all, but sometimes the greater lessons are learned when we're a little bit more vulnerable.
Greg, this has been great. Thank you so much for talking to us. Network members are going to eat this up, and as always, if there's anything I can do, you only have to reach out because we value you, man.
Thank you. I really appreciate you doing this. I've wanted to talk about this particular topic for quite a while, and no one's been interested. So I'm really glad that this is a topic that you and the network members are interested in. And if anybody has any additional questions, you can get a hold of me through my website. There's a contact form right on the website homepage. Goes straight to my email. If I can help you out, please get a hold of me, and I'll try my best to do so.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much.